What's going on, guys? Today we are back, and today we are installing a standalone ECU and harness in my 1UZ swapped 89 Toyota pickup. Brought to you in part by Alpine Toyota. Now, there is a number of reasons that I want to go with a standalone engine management system in this pickup. One reason being the ignition system with this early 1UZ is insanely complicated. There is two different distributors behind the timing cover right here at the front of the camshafts. There's two different igniters, there's two different coil packs, and if just one of those fails, it'll barely run, if run at all. And another reason is a lot of the sensors that are on this engine are getting pretty old, and to get new replacement parts is really expensive. For example, the mass airflow sensor alone is like a $550 part, and with the standalone, that specific sensor goes away. And at the end of the day, the engine harness I'm using in here is from 1992. It is a 30-year-old engine harness. Before I put it in, I ripped it right apart and I put new covering on it. I repaired it where I noticed was broken, but it's still old. A lot of the plugs barely work, and with the standalone, it's just getting rid of all that old stuff. I'm gonna put the new stuff in and it should be mint. And the main reason why I'm going with a standalone in this truck is the ECU was actually on its way out. Ever since I put the 1UZ in, I've had ever so slight issues. Not enough to make it undrivable, but every once in a while there is a hesitation or a stutter, especially on highway speeds. I'd say is where I notice the most. I'm halfway through the rev range and then all of a sudden it'll just and then keep going, and it's super annoying. Not only that, every time I turn the truck off and turn it on, the idle is at a different spot. It can never make up its mind where it wants to idle at. And from what I've read online and what you guys have said in comments, my ECU is most likely. And I agree. I physically checked everything else. I've talked to techs at Toyota about my issues, and we've all come to the general consensus that it's most likely just a dying ECU, especially because these early 1UZs have been known to have problems with their ECUs, with the capacitors leaking out or dying entirely and needing rebuilds. So let's start by ripping out this old harness. Now, you might be wondering why I took the intake off to do a standalone harness. Well, one, in between the lower part of the intake manifold and the upper part, there was a harness that kind of came through there. Now that would have been able to get out with just taking the top off. But I had to take the lower intake manifold off and all the injectors and stuff because on the 1UZ, the starter is right there below all of that. And the new standalone harness doesn't include any sort of starting circuit in it, which is not a big deal. I'm gonna make a new harness myself. It needs a big main wire to the battery and a trigger wire that goes to the ignition, and that's it. Super straightforward. But yeah, that's why all that had to come apart. And here is another reason why I want the standalone harness. Look how big this ECM is. I had to cut out my glove box just so that I could fit it up here behind the dash. So when this is gone, I'll also get a glove box back, and yeah, that'll be nice. Okay, in theory, everything is disconnected, and I'm ready to start pulling the whole harness out. You know what's crazy? Look at the different sizes in these ECUs. This is about 30 years, I guess, of difference. I don't actually know how old the Spitronics Mercury 2 is. It looked like it might be an older style standalone ECU, but either way, the factory 1UZ ECU is for an auto, so it is a bit bigger than it could be, I guess, but 1UZs were only ever available in an auto. And this little guy controls the engine, and that's it. So in theory, it should be smaller. So now that everything is out of the way in the engine bay, I've made up this harness here. This harness here is to pick up things that the standalone doesn't control. So that guy goes there, this guy goes over to the coolant temperature so that my gauges can actually read what my engine temp is at. This guy here in the middle goes to the starter, and this very long one comes all the way around the far side of the engine, drops down, and picks up oil pressure. And the oil pressure, just like the temperature sensor, is just for the gauge, so I can see on my dash what the oil pressure is like. So earlier I mentioned one of the reasons why I want to do the standalone is to clean up the ignition system. And the way I'm doing that is with these. These are Audi R8 coil on plugs. So the computer tells these when to spark, and they spark. That's it. No extra accessories. These get wired straight to the ECU, and done. And these Audi coil packs fit right in place on the 1UZ. Alright, so now that the wiring harness is all routed here, the intake's back on, it's mostly back together, it's time to do the task that I've been looking forward to least. This little gear right here came with the kit, and it goes behind the harmonic balancer off the crankshaft. And basically this guy here is detected by the crank sensor, which then sends signals to the ECM, which then tells the igniters and the fuel injectors when to fire. So in order to make room to get in there to remove the harmonic balancer, I'm gonna pull the rad out because it'll just be easier. Well, now that the radiator is pulled, you can see where the harmonic balancer is down there. And usually I would use the old bump the starter trick to, loosen it up to take the bolt off. But in this case, the starter's not wired. But I have had luck using my impact on those bolts before. It's just none of my batteries are charged. So while I wait for that to charge, I've got a pretty neat opportunity to take apart the front of the engine here so I can take out the old distributors here that are no longer going to be used, and the old cam position sensors. So I was actually able to remove more than I thought I was going to be able to. I initially thought this guy was going to have to stay in place, which I guess is the distributor body, but it also houses the camshaft position sensor there. And yeah, this whole thing gets removed. The rotor lives inside of it, and yeah, there's the cap. And there's what it used to look like. There she is now. So also, while I've got all of this apart and I have the opportunity to check the timing, I've put the harmonic balancer where it says top dead center should be. And yeah, everything is still timed. It is perfectly in time on the camshafts as well. And my timing belt still looks mint, so I don't need to worry about that, but it's just one of those things that's good to check while I'm in here and I'm this far into the engine. And there it is, the impact did do the trick. And down here, you can see this guy here. That little sprocket. That's what we're changing out. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, we're actually deleting the mass airflow sensor with the standalone harness. And the way we're able to get away with that is that sensor right there. That is a map sensor, and it came with the standalone harness. And instead of telling the computer what to do based off data before the intake, it is essentially just taking data from vacuum pressure instead. All right, so in theory, I think everything should be wired and ready to go. I turned on the fuel pump and made sure there is no leaks in my fuel rails or any of the injectors, so we're good to go there. And now before I'm ready to actually start it, I'm going to get my wife to come out and crank it over, and I'm going to make sure that we're actually getting spark from these coil packs. And if that works, I'm going to plug back in my circuit opening relay so that we have fuel again, and hopefully she'll start. Okay, so yes, there was spark there. So now I'm going to put this coil pack back in and plug in a circuit opening relay, and then we should have fuel, and hopefully she should fire right up. Keep going. 1 second, sorry. Okay, try again. The battery was loose! Alright, and check it out. It did start, and I did actually drive it out of the shop. But unfortunately, that's where I got to cut it off today because Max Powell showed up, and we currently got his wife's Land Cruiser in my shop, and we are swapping the tranny on it. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a future video where we show off the new Spitronics ECU with the coil unplug conversion, see how this drives. Anyways, guys, that about wraps up this week's episode of Dirt Garage. I hope you enjoyed it. If you don't mind, please smash that thumbs up button, and hey, consider subscribing. I upload weekly Toyota building, wheeling, and off-roading content.